everybody. Welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us here on the network where we cover the most interesting live trials and legal stories in the news today. And today we are going to be live in 4 courtrooms across the country. Let's talk about it right now. As horrific and disturbing these details are, and there's no question about that, it helps to determine a timeline of events. How long was this neglect going on for? How long was baby Sterling dead in that seat? And one of the ways that we're able to determine a timeline is also from the development of the maggots. That brings us to the testimony of Dr. Timothy Huntington, who's a forensic entomologist, that will talk more about the timeline in relation to when those maggots form. Take a look.
Your opinion, and you hold that to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that Sterling was alive when he was infested?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have an opinion as to how long Sterling had been infested while he was still living?
Yes. The period of infestation for those maggots to develop to the stage that they were at would have been between 9 and 13 days.
Would that make August 20th being the latest date at the minimum when the infestation could start?
That would put it at, the 20th or 21st would be the last possible date, and it certainly could have been before that.
Do you have an opinion as to whether during this period of infestation that Sterling had been cleaned, bathed, or been moved at all?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
The maggots in association with Sterling's diaper were there primarily to feed on, well, they were attracted to one of really 3 things, either the feces, the urine, or the extreme diaper rash. If there had been bathing or diaper changing or changing of the clothing or bedding, things of that nature, those maggots would have gone with the changing. So if you think about maggots in a diaper full of feces.
How long would Sterling have needed to be in that dirty diaper before that attraction started?
Well, the attraction can certainly start right away, because anybody who's ever been around little kids, you know when a kid has a dirty diaper, if you can smell it, the flies can smell it way before you can. And so that would be enough of an attraction for the flies to say, hey, there's a spot I can lay eggs. But for the flies to actually get to that area would have taken some more time. Diapers, of course, are designed to keep all of that stuff in, right? That's why we buy diapers. And so that's going to provide a pretty extreme barrier for the flies to gain access, and it's going to take them some time to defeat those barriers.
And how do they do that?
Well, they can certainly smell it, and then once they can smell that attraction, they look for just about any way they can to get into there.
The key there is timing. He was left there for quite some time. Let's talk more about this right now with criminal defense attorney Paige Pate. Paige, we expect the closing arguments today at around 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. What are you looking out for?
Well, I think it's obvious the defense is going to try to do the best they can to show that she was suffering from all sorts of mental problems. Obviously, there's been some, at least, preliminary diagnosis that she had postpartum depression. Obviously, she also had a substance abuse problem right around the time she should have been caring for this child. So I think the defense will be trying to focus the jury on, as hard as it's going to be, having some sympathy for what she was going through at the time. Of course, on the other hand, the prosecution has laid out a pretty straightforward case. They have used the evidence, I think, to try to create a visceral reaction with this jury. I mean, the testimony we just listened to, you can't help but just squirm. I mean, it's revolting to most folks who are just going to show up for jury duty, not prepared to hear this kind of testimony, and they're going to be certainly sympathizing with this baby that should never have died. So it's going to be tough, I think, for the defense to pull this out based on the evidence that we've seen and heard so far.
Yeah, you can only imagine that those jurors will never be the same after this case. Really, probably the most horrifying, one of the most horrifying cases I've ever seen. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, let's talk about intent in the Cheyanne Harris case. We'll be right back. difference in how the care was handled for baby Sterling and 2-year-old Nyla. There's a difference there. There seems to be. And really what the prosecution wants to stress is that at one point, there's food, there's clothing, there's ways to help everybody else in the house, but not Sterling. That's an interesting point. Let's continue on with this police interrogation tape.
I apologize because I haven't been at your house or your place, so I don't know. Where was Sterling?
In the next bedroom in the suite.
Okay. Is the swing turned on?
None of the time, because after a while it shuts off. Normally I have it playing and moving on a slow motion with a little mobile, and it plays music too.
Okay. So Sterling was in the swing, but the swing wasn't moving at that point. Okay. When you found Sterling, did you take him out of the swing, or is he still in the swing?
He was still in the swing.
Okay. And when you get Zach, then what happens after you get Zach?
After some freaking out and having no idea what to do or say, he called me and
Okay, we're playing you this testimony right now and this evidence because of anticipation of the live feed at 10 o'clock with the jury instructions and closing arguments. Now, I want to get a different perspective right here. I'm back here with Paige Pate. Paige, here's an interesting point. We believe the jury is going to be instructed only on something called general intent, not specific intent. Can you please elaborate for our audience what this means for Cheyanne Harris?
Sure, it's a very important topic, especially in a case like this. In most murder cases, the state has to prove that the defendant intended to kill the individual who died, right? I mean, that's the whole part of the murder. You have to show that the shooting, the stabbing, whatever, was an intent to kill that individual. In a case like this, involving child neglect or child cruelty, you don't have to show an intent to kill the child. And clearly in this case, I don't think the state could show that Ms. Harris intended to kill the baby. What they have to show is that she had general intent to violate the statute, which is to neglect the child in such a way that the death was reasonable and foreseeable. So specific, you have to prove they intended specifically to kill. General, they only have to prove that she violated the law by not providing adequate care.
And it sounds like it's a much easier case for the prosecution to prove that she at least intended to neglect the child, but like you said, not intended for Sterling to die. That's a really interesting dissection right there, and we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we have more testimony to play from you from the Cheyanne Harris trial. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. We have a very busy day today, going to be in multiple courtrooms across the country. But before we talk about any of that, there's always so much else happening in the news today. So here's a special report about the top stories trending in the country right now.
This is today's True Crime Update from the Law and Crime Network. New reporting on the arrest and possible deportation of rapper 21 Savage. According to TMZ, which cites the rapper's lawyer, immigration agents were on the scene when 21 Savage was pulled over by DeKalb County Police on Sunday. Police did not turn over the rapper to immigration officials as previously reported. 21 Savage, whose real name is Shea Ben Abraham Joseph, was born in the UK and brought to America by his parents as a child. Then he overstayed his visa. According to his lawyer, he applied for a U.S. visa available to crime victims in 2017. The rapper remains in the custody of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The nurse accused of raping an intellectually challenged woman at a Phoenix healthcare facility is pleaded not guilty. Nathan Sutherland, a former practical nurse at the facility, was charged with 2 felonies, including sexual assault and vulnerable adult abuse. Sutherland was arrested after his DNA was a match for a baby born to a disabled woman he cared for in January. Court records describe the woman as not alert and needing a maximum level of care. DNA and online ancestry services led to a break in the cold case of a dead boy found under a North Carolina billboard 2 decades ago. The Orange County Sheriff identified the boy as a 10-year-old named Robert Adam Witt. Barbara Ray Venter, the same consultant who helped solve the Golden State Killer case, used DNA to determine the child was half white and half Asian. That led to online DNA services finding a potential relative and eventually to the boy's mother. A suspect has been identified who is currently in prison on a separate case. Charges have not yet been filed. This is today's True Crime Update. I'm Aaron Keller for the Law&Crime Network.
Thanks, Aaron. Pretty remarkable when you think about it, how the changes in technology and DNA can lead to answers that we may not have had years ago. If you want to follow the other top trending stories of the day, go to lawandcrime.com. Right now, we're going to switch gears and go back to Cheyanne Harris. We expect to be live in that courtroom in under a half hour with jury instructions and closing arguments. And where we last left off, we were trying to understand the circumstances that ultimately led to the death of baby Sterling. That brings us to the testimony of Jennifer Shriver, who was a neighbor of the defendant and talked about her interactions both with the defendant and, more importantly, with Sterling and the other child in the house, 2-year-old Nyla. Take a look.
Did you see Cheyanne Harris arrive home?
I did.
And tell me what you mean, how you saw it.
I seen her walking up the sidewalk. I could hear their car pull up. They didn't have the quietest car. So I heard them pull up and seen her walking up into their apartment.
And what time of day was that?
I'm not 100% sure.
Did you watch Sterling overnight?
Yes.
Would it have been the next day?
Yes.
After Miss Cheyanne arrived home and you saw her walking into the apartment complex, did she come directly to pick up the children?
No.
What happened?
She had texted and said that she needed a minute, if she could have a few minutes to just get herself together before coming to get the kids.
Did you agree?
I did.
What happened next?
Nella ran out of milk and she was on her last diaper, and I drew her a text telling her that it was time that she needed to come get the kids.
And did she come get the kids?
No.
Well, how long was it after she arrived at the apartment complex and she said she needed a little time? Did you reach out to her to say that she needed to come get the kids?
I don't know how much time had passed. I just knew that her baby needed milk and needed diapers, and they were starting to get fuzzy.
And you told her that and she come right away?
No.
What happened?
Me and my boyfriend, I ended up grabbing the kids' stuff and we brought them over to her.
Why did you do that?
Because Nala was fussy. She needed a diaper change. She needed milk. Things like that.
What happened when you went to the defendant's apartment?
Ms. Harris came to the door and seen that I had brought the kids over to her, and she kind of and rolled her eyes like she wasn't ready to have the kids back.
And did you give her the kids?
Yes.
Was that the last time that you saw Sterling alive?
Yes.
How did you learn that Sterling had died?
I was freshly out of the hospital, just gotten home. I went outside for a cigarette, and I noticed that Mr. Cohn was outside. And I said hi, but he didn't say anything back to me. So I walked over to him, and I said, "Is everything okay?" And that's when he stated to me that he is gone. And I said, "Who's gone?" He said, "My boy." I said, "What do you mean gone?" "He's just gone," he said.
And what did you say next?
I don't remember exactly what I said next, but I said, "You mean he's dead? He's gone?" I don't know.
What was Mr. Cohn doing?
He was outside smoking a cigarette.
Did that upset you?
A little bit. I told him, I said, if your baby's gone, I said, have you called anybody? Have you called 911 or anything? He's like, we don't know what to do. I was like, well, you need to put your cigarette down and you should probably go inside and call 911.
Did you see Miss Harris?
I didn't see Miss Harris for some time had passed there.
That bizarre behavior from Zachary Cohen was recounted in his trial, and it didn't fare too well for him. He was ultimately found guilty of murder and child endangerment. Yes, we're talking about a different case here with a different set of circumstances, a different defense. I'm back here with Paige Pate, and we're trying to analyze what to expect with the closing arguments today. My thought, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is the prosecution going to stress the fact that there was a 2-year-old in the house that was perfectly healthy, that this 2-year-old was fed, taken care of, she was fine. She was taken away from the parents ultimately when Sterling was found dead. But that discrepancy between Sterling and Nyla, I mean, how do you just, I mean, that seems to be a blatant fact right there that the prosecution can't ignore. I'm curious your thoughts on it, though.
Right, Jesse. I think they will stress that fact. Obviously, there was a difference in the way she cared for one of her children versus the other. I think they will also stress the fact that within the house, she had available to her food, diapers, all the things she needed to take care of both of the children, but she chose not to use that, at least for her son, who ended up dying. So the prosecution will stress that, and I think they'll go back through the very graphic testimony, the very graphic evidence of how the baby was found. That's just going to stick with the jury during deliberations. There's a temptation to overdo that, I think, from the state side. Too many pictures, too many graphic details. But they need to remind the jury what they saw when they came into the house and found the baby. And I think that's just going to be very strong, very compelling testimony and argument, and tough to overcome for the defense.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about the discovery of baby Sterling. We'll be right back. Not only is the jury probably affected by listening to these details, but you have to imagine the first responders and the people who actually saw Sterling. It's not an easy sight, not something that they're ever going to forget. Let's continue on with the testimony of Chief Deputy Reed Palo.
Ormond, and everyone was aware you were a deputy, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so you took Cheyanne Harris out to your truck. What did you do when you were in the truck with her?
I just asked her what happened, when she had checked on Sterling last and how that process had gone. Initially, she told me that she had woke up and fed him the night before, which was and that was the last time that she had seen him, and that was inconsistent with the initial information I had. Was that they had checked on him at 9 a.m. and that at 11:30 they discovered him deceased, and I may have misunderstood in the dispatch, but I think everybody basically understood it was, that couple of hours. But in talking with Cheyanne, that time kept expanding, and she admitted that she wasn't sure when she had fed him or cared for him last, and that it would have still been light out the night before. It was around the time or after Zach had gone to work, but before it had gotten dark out, that she'd actually seen him or fed him. And she said that she'd fed him formula. She said that last night he had taken 4 ounces, and then he would take another 4 ounces.
All right, let's back up a little bit in regards to your conversation with the defendant. In speaking with her, did you find out just some basic information about her family?
Yes.
Okay. What did she tell you about her relationship with Zach Cohen?
She said they'd been...
Wow. Trying to understand the details of what happened is never easy. I'm back here with Paige Pate to try to understand this. Now, Paige, let's take the law away, the closing arguments away, the mountains of evidence. You just tell me, because I'm trying to understand what happened here. Really, what happened? How could a 2-year-old be okay in the house and this baby was just unattended for? What happened?
Well, Jesse, the challenge in cases like this is trying to understand how a mother would let a child die, this way especially. Perhaps she was overwhelmed. She could handle one child, but not two. Perhaps she connected more with her daughter than her son. I mean, there's no logical explanation to it, obviously. I don't think anyone on the jury can put themselves in her shoes, Ms. Harris's shoes, and say, yeah, I can kind of understand how this happened. No, I don't think there's any explanation for it that's going to make sense to the jury, that's going to make sense to the judge, or any of us who are watching this trial. It's just tragic, and that's the only word for it.
Will the postpartum depression defense, the the substance abuse, will that play a factor for the jury?
It's all the defense has. I mean, there's no question that the child died. There's no question that the mother neglected the child. There's no question that the circumstances of the child's death were horrific. The only thing the defense can do is say, well, here's some explanation. Let us offer you this. Maybe you can sympathize or empathize with her a little bit because she's going through so much difficulty in her own personal life. But I just don't see how that's going to be enough for a not guilty verdict here, especially, as you pointed out earlier, the police were able to gather enough evidence to show that whatever her condition was, Ms. Harris, the mother, she was taking care of the other child. She had the essentials there in the house. She could have taken care of the baby, and he'd still be alive today, but she chose not to.
Yeah, I wonder if it would have been a different case if there was only one child, their first child. And but when you have that 2-year-old in the house, so you see in those videos, Zachary Cohen in his police interrogation tape, or just being interviewed, but he's holding her. He's holding her. I think it changes the whole dynamic of this case. We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about our live trials of the day. We are in multiple courtrooms today. We're covering a lot, so stay tuned here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back, and we'll start with Cheyanne Harris.